So I'm just carrying on straight from the last lesson. I've added some comments to the code. So event listeners, some variables declared here. This function on submit, which is called whenever a user clicks the submit button. And currently what it is doing is validating the contents of the guest text field, which is on the stage. You can put in a guess there, and when you click on submit at the moment, it's being validated to make sure it's a number. So let's continue, because when we've validated this, we want to compare it to the number that's being generated by the software, which we did on this line, using mathrandom, multiplying it by 100, adding 1 to it. So the way we're going to do that is to use an if statement. But before I do that, I just want to check, as well as it being a number, I want to check that the input is a whole number that the user has put in. So I'm going to use an AND operator for this. I'm going to cast the number to an int and check to see if the int version is exactly the same as the number itself. Because if that is the case, then the number itself must have been an int in the first place. And so this AND operator makes sure that this code is only executed when both of these statements are true. So if my guess is an int, and if my guess is a number, this code will be executed. And if not, this code will be executed. So let's test that out. If I put in something that's not a number, saying it's not a number. If I put in a number but not an integer, still saying it's not a number. If I put in an integer, saying it is a number. That's because I haven't changed the trace, but it should say it is an integer now, but never mind. We can see the basic principle, it's working. So let's remove those trace statements, and instead of having a trace statement in this else part of the code, I want to set this text box to warn people to put in an integer. I've called this info text, so I'm just going to copy that and put that into the else code block there. The text property allows me to change the text inside it. Please enter a whole number. If I test that, control test. If I don't put in a whole number, it will say please put in a whole number. So I've got the data validation all set up there. So now I want to compare the number to the randomly generated number, which I'm going to do with an if statement. If my guess is greater than the number to guess, I'm still going to use this info text, but this time I'm going to say too high, because my guess will be higher than the generated number, so the guess will be too high. If I use less than, it's going to be too low. If I test to see if it's exactly the same as the generated number, in that event it will be correct. So I've got there all my comparisons. Actually, before I test that out, I'm just going to trace that to see what I'm aiming for. So I'm aiming for 67. If I put in 66, too low. 68, too high. 67, it's correct. But I can still continue to check different numbers, and ideally after I've found the number I'm looking for, I really want it to stop allowing me to check different numbers until I press reset. The way I'm going to do that is to add in another variable. I'm going to call it playing game. At the start you can play the game. I'm going to say, well, you can't play the game when you've guessed it to be correct. But when you press the reset button, you can play the game again. But in order to make sure that this is enforced, I'm going to have to test to see if playing game is true or false before I execute all this code. And so I'm going to have to put in an if statement. If playing game equals true, and these curly brackets have always got to correspond to each other. An opening one has got to correspond to a closing one. I'm selecting all this and pressing tab to make it easier to see where my curly brackets open and close. So if this playing game is true, this code can be used. Otherwise, if playing game is false, and that will happen when I've clicked the correct answer, so when I've guessed the correct answer, this code will no longer be able to be executed until I press reset. Let's see the effect of that. I'm looking for 32. If I test 31, it's saying too low. If I test 32, it's saying correct. Test 31 again. Now it's not saying too low. But if I click on reset, and I now try 31, it will say too low until I try 32 again. But what I really want to happen when I press the reset button is for the number to guess to change. Remember that the number to guess is set with this line. So let's copy that line over. And let's paste it in this place here, the onReset, which is the function that is called when the reset button is pressed. Because I've already declared the variable, I'm not going to use the var keyword or the type again, but I'm going to leave it like that because that will generate a new random number. I'm going to use the trace function to find out what that new random number is. And then I'm going to control test. So I'm at the moment looking for 47. Try 45, it will say too low. I try 47, saying correct. And now I can't do anything else until I press reset. And now I'm looking for 74. So when I try a number, I can do it again. It's now responding to my guesses until I guess correctly again, at which point it will stop responding to my guesses until I press reset, and then it selects a new number to guess. So that's the software now completed, except for the timer, which I'll talk about in a second. But before I do that, let's just go through how this works again. So we've got on our stage 4 things that can interact with ActionScript: the guess text, input text, the info text, which is dynamic text, can be altered by ActionScript, 2 buttons, the submit button and the reset button. And we've got event listeners, listening for mouse clicks on those 2 buttons. They've been written at the top. There's the onSubmit function, which is run when the submit button is pressed. There's the onReset function down here, which is run when the reset button is pressed. And I also declared some variables here, one of which creates a new random number at the start of the program. And what that allows me to do is when I click on the onSubmit button, it allows me to compare what I've entered in this box here with the randomly generated number. I'm doing that in the if statements here. If my guess is greater than the number to guess, the way I got my guess out of the text box was with this line. So I've cast it to a number. I'm also checking to make sure it is a number and an int. If it's not, then the info text says please enter a whole number, and that's just been set up as an if and an else. It's running the else if the if doesn't resolve to true. When I correctly guess the number, when my guess is exactly the same as number to guess, it says correct. And then this playing game latch is used to make sure I can't continue making guesses. So this is set to false, so this if statement will no longer allow this code to be run when I click the submit button until the reset button is pressed, which calls this function on reset, and that sets playing game to true again so I can make guesses, and it also generates a new random number. So that's how that software works. But I also want to add a timer to the software. A timer in this top corner. When you make your guess and submit, the timer starts. When you've guessed correctly, the timer stops. Then you reset and you make a new guess, the timer starts again. So I'm going to give you a project which is to make a timer on its own. So there's the timer text. If you press start, these are seconds, these are minutes. Press stop, the timer stops. Press start again, the timer continues. Press stop again, the timer stops. Press reset, the timer goes back to 0. So that's the project that I'd like you to do yourself. If you're feeling very adventurous, you can try incorporating it into this ActionScript file as well. But first of all, I will just go through the basics of how to create a timer. What you need to look at in LiveDocs is timer. Make sure you've got a runtime selected. LiveDocs will tell you how to set up a timer. It will also tell you the functions that you can use with it. Let's go back to Flash, and let's set up a brief timer here. So var timer equals new timer. The delay is in milliseconds, so 1000 is a second. 0 means the timer will continue until it's stopped. I'm adding an event listener. That's going to listen for timer events. So I've got to add in the function as well. Let's put in a trace to see it working. Actually won't work at the moment. I'll show you why. Nothing's happening. Nothing's in the output. The trace isn't showing anything. The reason for that is I haven't started the timer. And to know how to use the start, the stop, the reset functions, you just need to look at LiveDocs. But I've just started it there. And every second now that function will be called by the timer. And it's using that trace function every second, which shows it works. So that's the code I'm going to give you. I'm going to point you to the LiveDocs for more information on the timer, if you wish to look at it. And I'll show you it again, what I want you to do. I will go through it in the next lesson. Seconds, minutes, when you click on the start, it starts. Stop, it stops. Start, it starts again. Reset, we'll set it back to 0. So in the next lesson I'll show you how to do that, and also how to include it in the Guess the Number application.